This lecture talks about questioned documents. First question we do have to ask is, what is questioned document? And that's any object with handwriting or print whose source or authenticity is in doubt. We're not sure where it came from. This can include letters, checks, driver's licenses, contracts, wills, voter registrations, passports, petitions, lottery tickets, and a plethora of other documents. And it even includes writings that are found on walls, doors, or other objects because it's something that could help us identify a person or, who did something versus not doing it. We'll first start with forgery. And typically, forged documents include things like checks, employment records, legal agreements, licenses, wills, and something that has a personal nature to it. Whereas a literary forgery is a piece of writing, such as a historic letter, like the Bixby letter, from what was thought to be from Lincoln. And fraudulence is any forgery that's done for material gain. Now, material gain could mean monetary gain, but not necessarily. And check forgery includes different things like ordering somebody else's checks, altering a check, taking somebody else's check, altering it, and cashing it, or of course they could try and create it from scratch.
When trying to figure out if the document is in question, there's a few things we need to think about. We have to figure out what the origin of the document is, and then what kind of office machine produced a printout or photocopy of the document. What kind of tool was used to write the document? Are we looking at an old style pen? Are we looking at a ballpoint pen versus one of the gel pens, or a fountain pen, a pencil, or any kind of other, writing medium? And then how many copies of the document were produced, so we could figure out, how many we could be finding before we actually find an original. And then we can ask, if any of the sections of a document were altered, because it doesn't have to be the whole document. It can actually just be a section that was added, deleted, erased. And of course, we would look at handwriting characters. Do they match the person that supposedly wrote it? There are some principles of handwriting that we look at. No two people write exactly alike, and people are never going to write the same way twice. So even if, you look at your handwriting from, a class in the morning to a class in the afternoon, you'll see that there are some variations in your handwriting. And a graphologist is actually somebody that's going to study the shapes of your writing to try and divine personality. It's not really a science, but it's something that people try and do to try and get a profile. Now, time in writing. This is talking about time period. So depending on the locale and the era, handwriting may differ. So if you grew up in the early 1900s compared to, the mid 1900s, your handwriting may look a little different, and especially from then to now, because handwriting was taken very seriously and was a skill that had to be perfected. And people took handwriting in school all the way throughout, and their handwriting was very neat and elegant looking. And typically they would use one of two methods, the Palmer method or the Zaner-Bloser method, which worked on how to form the letters and making sure they look a certain way. If you look at the sample that's here, you can see that the letters are kind of loopy and they all slant to the right. And this was something that, did need to be perfected. So it also changed depending on what country you came from. If you lived in Britain or if you lived in America, the handwriting style may be different because of how and what was accepted in that time. So we divide handwriting into two groups, master pattern and transient factors, and we study 12 characteristics of these. And the master pattern of a writer is what you figure out, and that's your overall pattern that you're going to use, and all of your writing's going to look like that. And transient factors are factors that are going to affect only a given act of writing. So because you may be tired or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or having to write fast, or in a dangerous situation, those are going to change the writing, what the writing looks like, but the master pattern will be the same, and that's going to be the relative factors or the relative relationships, which are ratios between absolute factors, which we'll look at. We're talking about the master pattern being very unique, and you create this as a child, and then you build graphic maturity. So as you don't have to think about forming the letters and how you have to shape them, the writing changes. So it looks a little different. If you look at a child's writing versus an adult's writing, you see the child's writing looks blockier, it's a little messy. There's a lot of thought that goes into the form, whereas an adult can write fluently, and because they have more graphic maturity, they subconsciously form the letters. And then, of course, we talked about those transient factors, and what's going to change, if you're tired, cold, nervous, and of course the writing surface that you're writing on. So the things that we're going to look for are letter form, line quality, and line quality is going to be related to the speed of the writing. So if somebody's trying to write slow, they're typically going to have shaky lines of uniform thickness and definite stop points where the pen hits the paper and comes off the paper. And then fast writing will have smooth lines with tapers at the end where the pen is lifted. And this is kind of like a feathering that happens at the end. We would notice. Somebody that's trying to copy somebody's writing tends to have slower writing, so you see some shaky lines and see those definite stop points. We're also going to look at absolute features, which are not useful, but we still look at them because we want to look at the height of the letters, the slant, the spacing between words, and the ratios between those features are useful because those are consistent. We call those the relative um, factors or relative relationships because they will generally be the same because they're written and your writing will be aesthetically pleasing to you. So all of your writing is going to have that trend. We also look at rare characters such as the letter Q here because people tend to make those very unique. Sometimes numbers will be unique, sevens and some other letters. So if somebody tries to disguise writing, it's probably going to be written a little bit more slowly, so you're going to have those shaky lines, less graphic maturity, and absence of those feather marks coming off the ends of the words. We can also look at machines. If a document does not have transfer dust and defects from an old machine and it's supposed to be an older document, then it's possibly a fake. And you can, determine an approximate time the document was created from the machine that it was created on, from, if it was created by a machine, the type of ink used, the type of paper used, even the way the paper was folded. Now, if somebody tampers with a document, um, they may have replaced pages or added or erased text. They might have changed the paper type or the fiber content. You're also going to look for staple holes to see if staple's been removed and try to be placed back. You use some light sources and filters such as UV and infrared to determine if there's different inks. And you analyze inks with chromatography. And what chromatography is, it's a method of separating components of mixtures using a solvent. And you can use different, you can put multiple spots onto a thin layer chromatography plate or onto chromatography paper. You put a solvent in the chamber, and what happens is as the solvent moves up the paper, the ink will separate into its component colors, and then that would give us an identifier of, if the inks actually match or not. And the more soluble the ink is, the further it's going to go up the paper. Then we can look at fiber content of the paper. Um, in the United States, typically rag is used for like money, and that's going to be a cotton or linen that was made from specially treated wood that was of spruce or pine. Resume paper typically is linen, which is high quality, and copy paper is low quality and inexpensive. And we measure paper by the weight of 500 sheets, and it's measured in pounds of that size. And the most general use copy paper, what we see in school, is going to be lightweight. Then handmade papers are usually going to weigh more, and such as your linens and the rags are going to weigh a lot more. We also look at watermarks on paper, which are those kind of hidden holograms that are in the paper, the brightness of the paper, the weight, and chain lines, which are formed from the wire molds when the wood pulp is poured out on them to form the sheets. So in order to make any kind of comparison, you need lots of exemplars, which are examples, and they need to be long, not just a few words, because you have to show the natural variations of the writer. Because as they keep writing, you're going to see some alteration, but it's going to be consistent. And then you're going to look at, of course, the handwriting and grammar, phraseology, the ink they use, and the word spacing to look at those relative features. Things that are good to know. Infrared photography and reflecting light at different angles are sometimes successful to reveal document content that has been altered because it'll look a little different. So you hold the light and the paper at different angles, try and see that. And in certain situations, indented writings, okay, which are just partially visible depressions, are found on like a notepad. So if somebody wrote on a notepad and it was written hard enough, the impressions would be made on the pages underneath. By using an electrostatic charge to the paper and some polymer film, sometimes you can just use graphite filings, you can see the indented writing and see what they wrote on top. And the last thing we're going to talk about is counterfeit currency. So counterfeiting is making a fake. And in this case, Secret Service, works with electronics and software makers to add the security features to the paper to make forgery extremely difficult. And they use the database FISH to help this. And you've seen, even in your lifetime, some of the bills have changed because they keep adding these features to protect it. And all these scanning features make it so that, or I'm sorry, all these security features make it so that scanning cannot reproduce the security features. It actually has to be printed into the paper, which is a rag kind of feel. So that's the first security feature, is actually the feel of our paper. It's unique. And regular paper contains starch, and because our paper bills contain a rag fiber instead of starch, we can use an iodine pen or a counterfeiting pen, which is down here. If you mark a bill with this pen, because it has iodine in it, it will say that iodine color, that amber color, and if it turns a black color, such as this one over here, it's fake. And this system is about 98% effective. Now, with question documents, you have to remember that there's different things to look for. Anything in question can be a check, a piece of or some currency. You're looking at documents, and you need to look at, okay, was it tampered with? We need to look and see if we can figure out what machine it was made on. And we can look at handwriting features. There's all those different things that we look at: line quality, absolute features, and the relative ratios. And then we can also look at inks using paper chromatography.